Hello, everyone, and welcome to this, I hope, enlightening chat about George Enescu, one of the most respected and admired musicians of our times. As you might know, I am premiering Enescu's recently discovered piano concerto with a few orchestras around the world and would like to find out a little bit more about this brilliant work. So I am delighted to chat to my very good friend, conductor Gabriel Bebeșelea today. Welcome, Gabriel. Please allow me to tell you a little bit about Gabriel's impressive career. In 2020, Gabriel Bebeșelea took up the position of principal conductor of the George Enescu Philharmonic Orchestra in Bucharest, adding to his positions as chief conductor of the Philharmonic of North Macedonia and principal conductor of the Transylvania State Philharmonic Orchestra of Cluj-Napoca, which he assumed at the beginning of the 16-17 season. Gabriel, you have dedicated so much of your life to researching and rediscovering music, and we owe so much to you for uncovering several long-forgotten or neglected musical masterpieces. So my first question would be, what drew you to George Enescu in the first place? And perhaps you could share with us your first encounter with Enescu's music.
Well, first of all, I think that we owe so much to George Enescu. So this is what drew me to what he has done, not only as a composer, but also a violinist, as a teacher, a mentor, a pianist, a conductor. So he was a real Renaissance person, not only musically, without any exaggeration. Growing up in a musical family in Romania, I think my first encounter with Enescu's music was before I was born, because he was not, and he is not only a legend in Romania, but he changed the perspective of what musicianship means in our country. Since I was a small child, I remember very well his first Rhapsody, of course. But I remember that during my primary school years, I was listening to a tape with his Poème Roumain. And it astonished me. And later I found out that he was only 15 when he started to write that piece, and I couldn't believe my ears. So it grew bigger and bigger, this wish to find out more about this personality, not because he was Romanian, just because he was an astonishing musician, which I had the feeling that personally I don't know plenty about. So little by little, I got more acquainted to his, let's say, canonic works, his symphonies, his orchestra pieces, his piano pieces. And later on, during my high school year, I first listened to Oedipe, his greatest opera masterpiece, and it blew my mind, literally. So after that, I had a real urge to find out more. So I was quite obsessed for a time, let's say, in a good way, I hope, with the question, how did Enescu as a composer came to life? How was he born? So I started researching and looking on the manuscripts before his Poème Roumain, which was Opus 1, but we have to mention the fact that before his Opus 1, he wrote 33 more opuses. And with Poème Roumain at the age of 15, I'd like to emphasize, he started to renumber his compositions, considering that he's a real composer with his first opus. But before that, we can find out even more about Enescu, in my opinion, because we can find out the way he was born. Because we cannot say that Enescu was, he just exploded with Poème Roumain. Something else should have been before. So little by little, I got closer to his manuscripts, and with the help of Maestro Cornel Teranu, who's one of the biggest Enescu scholars, I started to work with him and to look on Enescu's manuscripts, and then we started collaborating together on several pieces of his. Maestro Cornel Teranu is the one who finished some of his unfinished pieces, like, let's say, Caprice Roman for solo violin and orchestra, which is basically his violin concerto. So I discovered that during 3 years, so between 13 and 15, he successfully did a synopsis, actually, of everything what happened in classical music during 3 centuries. So between the age of 13 and 15, he succeeded to resume everything what happened in classical music. And in a way, we can say that Romanian history of music started with Enescu, because during that tender age, he succeeded to do everything what was before that done in the western part of Europe. And this drew even more attention on his works. So my first encounter with a real manuscript, which was unfortunately in shadow for a long time, was this piece, Pastoral Fantaisie, which was written in 1899, 1 year after the poem Romain. It was actually a commission by Edouard Colonne, the famous French conductor who premiered the poem. And it was performed by him, by Colonne, only once in Paris. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough audience in the attending the concert, and then Enescu, at his tender age of 16 and a half, believed that the piece wasn't successful. It wasn't true, because I found many reviews, and all of those were really positive. What happened was that 3 days before the performance, the president in France died. So it was there were national days of mourning, and that's why there wasn't enough attendance in the hall. So Enescu left it for a later period when he wanted to review it. He didn't succeed to review it, but it was completed. The parts were completed. The full score was completed. But unfortunately, until 2016 and 17, actually, never performed since 1899. So this was my first encounter. And after that, a whole universe opened up.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's just fascinating hearing you talk about it. And I completely agree that the whole universe is opening up. And the more we read and we listen and we get into Enescu's world, the more we want to find out. And this is so important. And it's so fantastic to be able to play his music all over and to do all of these premieres and introduce our audiences to his amazing music. Now, the piano concerto, he wrote when he was about 16, if I'm not mistaken. And I've just done the German premiere, which was so incredibly well received. And the musicians and the conductor and just me being on stage for myself, it was a huge honor. And I can't wait for the US premiere. It's such a special work. It's very Brahmsian. It's in D minor. It's got a huge orchestration. And I'd love to know, how did you discover this piece? And yeah, talk us through the process, please.
Well, it was during the period when I was already finishing up editing and publishing Pastoral Fantaisie. And I was working together with Maestro Cornel Serrano, who had an unlimited copies of his manuscript. And he studied it for a long time. And then we were talking about several pieces, and we were working on many other projects in regards with Enescu's music. So this was one of that project. So the piece was already edited, but I did the corrections. There were plenty of mistakes, not in Enescu's score, but in the parts. So we had to do a critical edition. This means that you have to research everything, all the sources. So this took a little bit of time to get everything put together, so you're sure, 100% sure that every note is in place and every articulation. And what's fascinating about Enescu, and you can see it even in his first period of composition, is the unusual big flux of information without getting the audience tired. So even though his music has a high level of details in the inner body, let's say, the flux of information floats very easily. But in order to get to that flux, there's a second thing, the perfection of the melodic construction. So in order to get this, you need to be sure that the details of articulations, dynamics, and orchestration are very clearly put in place. And this takes a little bit longer because Enescu, even if he was only 16, 17 during that period, he wrote really specific and different articulations. I might add that in Oedipe, he started in the beginning of the 20th century, 1906, 1907, to sketch it, and he finished it in the 30s. The premiere was in 1936. So he wrote more than 2.5 decades on that piece. In this opera, he reached at an unusually detailed level of construction, in which every single note has at least 3 or 4 more details. So this begins in his younger period compositions. So that's why it took a little bit longer to make sure that everything is in place. I might add, in regards with the perfection of the melodical construction, that I have an example now in mind. For instance, Kodai, when he was teaching composition in Budapest, he was showing his students the first movement of Enescu's first orchestral suite dedicated to Saint-Saëns, which is called Prélude à l'unisson, and literally is a piece written for strings playing the same thing. So a unisono string piece, which was something unknown until then. And why I called it perfection in the melodic construction, because it's not what I'm saying, it's what Kodai used to show his students, because it has this unendliche Melodie coming out from Wagner, but through a very personal filter coming out from Byzantine church music. So that's why there's a very unique way of leading the voice, leading the main voice. So even if the piano concerto is very Brahms-like, the orchestration is completely, let's say, a dedication to Brahms. It's 7 quarters and D minor, so first the piano concerto. So even if it has this, it has its stylistical and very intimate connection of Enescu's personal music. So getting back to editing and working on this piece, the problem was with the sources, but when you get to all the sources, then everything shines and it comes out really brightly.
That's so true. And is it the original or is it reorchestrated? How did you find the manuscript?
Every single note is written by Enescu. In this piece, he didn't, nobody put anything. So everything is written by himself. It's not like with Caprice Roumain, which I was talking before, his, let's say, violin concerto, in which the last movement is was put together from the sketches, or the case of Strigoi, the Ghosts, really huge oratorio, which he wrote in 1916, and he kind of lost the sketches and he couldn't finish it. So everything was put together after 6 decades. In this case, in the piano concerto, every single note is written by Enescu. So we have exactly what his sound was during, when he was 15 and a half, 16 years old. And why he was so much influenced by Brahms, because he started studying in Vienna between 7 and 13. He graduated when he was 13 years old. Only 2 people graduated at 13, Kreisler, Fritz Kreisler, and George Enescu. And he lived in the house of Josef Helmesberger Jr. And Helmesberger was the principal conductor of the Musikverein, of the Vienna Philharmonic, and was also the main teacher at the conservatory in Vienna. And he was kind of his child during that period. And of course, Brahms came very often to that house. So he was fascinated by Brahms. Not only that, but he played in the conservatory orchestra while Brahms was conducting. So there are many connections with Brahms's music. That's why, let's say, this concerto is a tribute. Enescu, I think it's interesting to know that Enescu always wrote many pieces at the same time. So he wrote at least 3 or 4 compositions in the same time. So he was beginning a lot of pieces, but didn't finish many of them because he was concentrating on one or another. He wasn't interested in commissions, so he didn't write a lot of commissions. He was interested on concepts. So things which got to his heart had the tendency to be finished earlier. Things which were, let's say, maybe just an idea, he had a tendency to leave behind for a later period.
You've given so many premieres of the Pastoral Fantasy and have recorded it with the Rundfunk Symphonieorchester Berlin, which also features George Enescu's rediscovered oratorio Strigoi, The Ghosts. We were talking about it a little bit before. And for our friends watching this chat, the CD was released under the label Capriccio in September 18 and is an absolute must for anyone interested in Enescu's works. How is curating this edition? Because you curated it, didn't you?
Yes.
It's a fascinating process, which of course takes so much time and dedication, but also a special understanding of Enescu's musical language.
Well, I'm very happy that I have the chance to do this work because it's one of my hobbies to work on manuscripts. So thankfully, people gave me the chance to prolong and to extend my hobby into this sort of researches. I'm very happy that the Enescu Museum published the Pastoral Fantasy and also Strigoi, The Ghost, in which I have a minor contribution. I just finished some bits and parts of the narrator and did the corrections, but the most work, it was a huge amount of work done by Cornel Serrano and Sabin Pouța. Cornel Serrano actually worked for several decades to put every bit and piece together because it was a puzzle. As I said, Enescu wrote many works in the same time. So in the sketches, on one single page, you can find 3 or 4 different compositions. So you have to decide, okay, this is the first piano trio, this is Strigoi, and this is the second symphony. So you have to find out which piece of the puzzle is missing and then to put it together. So it took several decades to do this work. Not only this, but Enescu tried to get his sketches of the ghosts, but the piece was written during World War I, and there was a problem. The royal family, and he was very close to the Romanian royal family, they moved to the capital city from Bucharest to Iași, to your home city, actually. And that was an important decision because Bucharest got attacked and Iași was a shelter. But in order to have this shelter, they sent all the valuable things of the country, the thesaurus, to Moscow. And Enescu also sent 2 boxes of his compositions and of his sketches to Moscow. Even nowadays, that thesaurus is still in Moscow because the Red Revolution came in place and the contract signed between the Romanian royal family and the Tsar family got burned, literally. So Enescu tried to retrieve his compositions even in 1948 when he gave concerts in Moscow. And there's a famous photo of him and Shostakovich talking. And he was trying to get back this oratorio. We don't know how, in which way it surfaced somehow in the 70s. And Cornel Serrano, who was one of the biggest Enescu scholars, started working upon it. So that's why we have this oratorio. But unfortunately, Enescu didn't reach it until his death. So after 1916, until 1955, when he died, he couldn't get to this. Also a piano trio and also a piano quintet. So these were the pieces which he sent part of the thesaurus. So I consider myself very lucky that I was part of the process of getting to life these works. But most of all, it's very important for me that musicians and audience alike try to get closer to Enescu.
I couldn't agree more. And we are so grateful that you are doing this work and you enjoy doing it, but then you are giving us all of this material that we can take all over the world. And as we said, Enescu's universe is such a complex one and versatile, and people just need to open up and then they will absolutely love his world. Gabriel, I can't thank you enough for this fascinating chat. And honestly, I've learned so much. For the lovely people of Detroit, I will be performing 3 concerts with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra and Eric Jacobson. And I'm coupling the George Enescu Piano Concerto, which will be the US premiere, with Clara Schumann's Piano Concerto. Both composers have written their concertos at the age of 16, so that's a beautiful link there. And I hope I'll see many of you at the Orchestra Hall